So I have the honor of sharing with you what the Upper Room Conference and the Proclaim movement are all about. And some of what I'm going to be saying to you this morning is a repeat of some things Cardinal Dolan said, as well as Archbishop Michael. But I tell you that is entirely intentional, because when you're launching a new movement, repetition is our friend. Because we want to make sure that the values of the movement sink deeply into our hearts and animate everything we do as we go forth. So here we are at the Upper Room, and we ask ourselves, what is the Upper Room? And I guess the quick answer is that the Upper Room is a response to the Archdiocese of Vancouver to Pope Francis's invitation to observe an extraordinary missionary month, which concludes on October 31st. And the theme for that month has been Baptized and Sent. That's what this is, the Upper Room. But more important than knowing what it is knowing why we are doing it. Why are we doing what we are doing today? If the Upper Room is going to be an authentic response to Pope Francis, then our why for hosting the Upper Room must be aligned to his why for celebrating the extraordinary month of mission. And so I want to read briefly a few pieces from a letter that Pope Francis wrote in 2017 when he promulgated the month of mission throughout the church. And just for context, so you know, he actually wrote this letter to Cardinal Filoni, who is the prefect for the Congregation for the Evangelization of Peoples, which is basically the part of the Roman Curia that kind of organized and gave structure to the month of mission. And the Pope began his letter by reaffirming that the Church is missionary by nature. Quoting St. Paul VI from his apostolic exhortation on evangelization in the modern world, which was written in 1975, Francis said, "Evangelizing is in fact the grace and vocation proper to the Church. It is her deepest identity. She exists to evangelize." Pope Francis then defined current reality by quoting St. John Paul II from his encyclical letter, Mission of the Redeemer, which was written in 1990. And Francis suggested the following analysis as a current spiritual landscape. The mission of Christ the Redeemer, which is entrusted to the Church, is still very far from completion. An overall view of the human race shows that this mission is still just beginning, and that we must commit ourselves wholeheartedly to its service. And then the Pope began to communicate his pastoral heart and his vision for the month. And he wrote these words: "I hope that all communities will devote the necessary effort to advancing along the path of pastoral and missionary conversion that cannot leave things as they are. Mere administration can no longer be enough." And I love personally this section of the text because it really shows the leadership of Pope Francis. Because leaders always live in the gap between what is and what can be. Leaders don't lie in bed at night dreaming about the way things are. They lie in bed at night dreaming about the way things could be and should be. And when you're caught up like we are in the most important mission in the world, it's the way things must be. Pope Francis then, writing to the Cardinal, asks a very simple but utterly prophetic question. And it's the kind of question that would be asked and talked about sitting for a cup of coffee at the dining table. He asks, what would happen if we take these words seriously? If the extraordinary month of mission was indeed the catalytic event that Pope Francis had prayed for, then this month would give birth to a new missionary impulse that is capable of transforming everything. Transforming parishes, dioceses, marriages, families, schools, structures, relationships, and most importantly, more and more human hearts. In Vancouver, I can't be more excited to say, this new missionary impulse has a name. It has a structure. It has a strategy. It's called Proclaim. And when Archbishop Michael gave his marching orders to the upper room planning team, one of the things that he said was, let us plan an event that shall be evaluated not by its seating capacity, but by its sending capacity. Now, this is an impressive seating capacity. 1,054 people. But I think there's more because some of you snuck in. But that's okay. You are welcome. But this conference is not about gathering a large group of people, as wonderful as this is. The question is, how many of us sitting here will be sent out? And that sending out cannot be done externally. The question is, how many of us at the end of this day will be compelled to go out? Compelled by the movement of the Spirit in our own hearts. You know, the first upper room 2,000 years ago was like a holding tank. It was a place of transformation and encounter with the Spirit, being mandated, being commissioned, and literally catapulted out of the upper room to go and live a life on mission. May it be so for us today. So what I want to do, to peel back sort of the curtain a little bit on the Proclaim movement, I want to talk about 4 key principles that this movement is founded on. And the first principle is the universal call to mission. The call to mission is conferred at baptism. It is not conferred at ordination or the profession of religious vows. Those are beautiful vocations so needed in the church today. And we are grateful to be in the Archdiocese of Vancouver, where young men are entering the seminary and being ordained, where young women are entering religious communities and living religious life. And many of these priests and brothers and sisters are here this morning. Just a hand. Let us show them our love right now for all that they do. When it comes to numbers of vocations active in ministry, the Archdiocese of Vancouver is doing very well when compared with other dioceses in Canada and literally other dioceses around the world. The Archbishop Michael, at his dinner on Tuesday, announced to the people that were in attendance that the average age of priests active in ministry in Vancouver has actually gone down, which means young men, and many young men, are being ordained. That is something to be celebrated. But he also let us know that the number is still the ratio. For every Catholic priest, there are 2,000 Catholics. One priest for every 2,000 Catholics. Now, healthy congregations invest in the ones that we're trying to keep, but also the ones we're trying to reach. And with one priest for every 2,000 Catholics, and really just a handful of catechists that are active and engaged in every parish, the majority of deployed resources, if you will, are going probably disproportionately to the ones we're trying to keep. At the neglect sometimes at the ones we're trying to reach. And of course, every soul matters. That's not what this is about. But Proclaim as a movement is focused on the ones we're trying to reach. 99.8% of the church is made up of lay people. The church is missionary by nature. We exist to evangelize. The question is, how will we direct more time and energy, talent, and resources to the evangelizing mission? Will we require more of the 0.01%? already so dedicated to the work of the church? Of course not. The only way forward is to encourage, to equip, to commission more and more lay people into the vineyard. What if we could mobilize just 5% of the lay faithful, not currently engaged in ministry, to dedicate themselves to the evangelizing mission? What if that could be 6% or 10% or 20%? Proclaim is a movement that invites, equips, and mobilizes the lay faithful to live a life on mission. And through this movement, we hope to see more and more lay people embrace their missionary identity, taking the initiative to share Jesus, empowered by the Spirit, motivated by love, and leaving all the results in the hands of God. As you think about embracing your own missionary identity and being more intentional in witnessing to your faith, you might anticipate feeling alone or isolated. But Proclaim is a growing movement of disciples where you will feel community, solidarity, and support. You are not alone. The second principle is the proximate periphery. We heard earlier, Pope Francis has continually exhorted the faithful to take the good news to the peripheries. And many of us equate periphery with far from here or far from me. In other words, Guatemala or Peru or Papua New Guinea or Sierra Leone. But the periphery isn't a geographic location. The periphery is referring to people that are far from Jesus and far from a Christian community. And by virtue of the relationships that you and I have with people that are not in a relationship with Jesus and are not part of a vibrant Christian community, the periphery is proximate. The periphery is in the face of your neighbor across the street. The periphery is standing next to you at the soccer game. The periphery is sweating beside you every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 6 a.m. in the gym. The periphery is proximate. Proclaim is a movement that will help us see these relationships in the proper prophetic lens. Could it be that God has given you a foundation of trust and unspoken permission to influence the lives of other people for such a time as this? Social science has concluded that modern men and women who are not in relationship with Jesus and do not belong to a Christian community go through 5 stages, 5 thresholds on their journey to discipleship. The first is initial trust. A person is able to simply trust a Christian believer. The second is spiritual curiosity. A person finds himself or herself intrigued by the claims of faith. The third is spiritual openness. A person acknowledges to himself or herself and to God that they are open. The fourth is spiritual seeking. The person moves from being kind of essentially passive to active in searching for things of faith. And then finally, intentional discipleship. This is what Sherry Waddell calls a drop-the-net decision. Conversion means accepting by personal decision the saving sovereignty of Jesus Christ and becoming his disciple. And this process, briefly described, is linear and sequential, and therefore, the most important threshold is the first one, being in a trusted relationship with a believer. As a movement, Proclaim is not encouraging anything like door-to-door visits with strangers, although that's acceptable. Rather, we are encouraging every disciple to consider the relationships in their life and ask themselves, is Jesus inviting me to accompany this person through intentional relationship evangelization? I want to play a short video from Alpha for us all, because this video beautifully illustrates what this first stage, this first threshold of learning to trust a believer is really all about. So have a listen and we'll come back.
Perfect. Yes. We all have that person in our lives.
neighbor we pass by every day outside our homes. That coworker we see at the office 5 days a week. Or those friends we catch up with every once in a while. People we wish could know and experience the love of God. How do we share it? Where do we even start? Deep inside, we know that it'll cost us something to open up our lives and share our faith. It takes time, vulnerability, sacrifice, the risk of rejection. But this is our call, to open our lives and to share Christ with the people close to us. Because it's only through opening your life up that spaces for honest conversations are possible. Spaces where people can truly be themselves and explore the deepest parts of life with people they know and trust. That's why we're running Alpha. It's a course over several weeks where you can invite your friends to explore life's biggest questions over a meal. It's a chance for you to invite that person into an honest conversation about faith. Because when it's hard to find the moment, or the words, or the courage, you can simply invite. Alpha, who will you invite?
The periphery is proximate. Vern Robertson, who's kind of a champion of evangelization locally here in the church in Vancouver, once said something in a talk that has never left me. He said, "The prodigals will not return to the Father's house until the Father's house is filled with the Father's love." This video is a beautiful illustration of that principle. The third principle of the Proclaim movement is that we're going to narrow the focus for greater impact. There are hundreds of tools of evangelization that we could endorse and promote, but we've chosen to focus on two: the Alpha program and CCO Discovery Study. So the question is, why narrow the focus? There's several reasons. First, we wanted to partner with organizations and promote evangelizing tools that had a long track record of fruitfulness in the Archdiocese and over a variety of contexts. Second, there are hundreds of tools that we could have chosen, but we cannot effectively train and support multiple tools. Therefore, for the sake of maintaining sort of quality training and support, we narrowed it down to two. Third, we wanted to partner with organizations that are committed to innovation and to the improvement agenda. And both Alpha and CCO are continually improving their tools and their training for the benefit of those who are using them and to enhance the relevance in the modern world. Finally, both Discovery and Alpha are available in multiple languages. And Alpha in particular is available in many of the languages spoken in the homes of the Lower Mainland. And we really believe that providing resources in multiple languages is an important piece, as it will help bring comfort and familiarity to more people. The final principle of the Proclaim movement is cycles of momentum, which looks like this. So the upper room that we are gathered at today for the first time is not a one-off event. It is a strategically situated in a broader, multiple-year design, what we call the annual cycles of momentum. Each of these cycles begins with this conference, the upper room, a momentum-building, large group gathered event. This is it. We are here. It's inspiring to be here. It is a profound experience of community and solidarity, of unity and mission with our shepherd and with each other. However, regardless of how wonderful an event is, one-off events come and one-off events go. And the meaning fades until it is nothing more than a distant memory. Sentimentally appreciated, but far from what Pope Francis had in mind when he said, "Let us not fear to undertake a missionary option capable of transforming everything." Upper Room is not a one-off event. At the end of the Upper Room Conference today, immediately after Mass, we will have a commissioning. That is an opportunity in the context of the liturgy and in solidarity with Archbishop Michael. We will say yes. We will opt in to the movement and to the commissioning. And one of the very special things that we're doing at today's commissioning at the end of Mass is that each of us will have an opportunity to come forward, and tables are going to be spread across this room, and individually sign a letter that will be sent to Pope Francis himself. And yes, that letter will be mailed to him. I was once involved with something similar to this, and a letter was sent to John Paul II when he was Pope. And he actually signed the letter and sent it back. No promises today, but it does encourage you. So I strongly encourage you to stay for Mass. You know, we used to have the one conference. Sometimes people would leave for good reason. They want to be at the liturgy the next day with their family. I totally get that. We've got kids. We're going to be at Mass tomorrow, but we're going to definitely stay for Mass today, and I encourage you to do that. But back to the cycles of momentum. So after the Upper Room, after the commissioning, disciples will have many opportunities to be trained in missionary discipleship, to engage in the work of evangelization with their family, friends, and associates. Disciples will be able to choose their own context in their homes, in their places of work where appropriate, in their parishes, in their school communities, as part of PrEP, as part of RCA. There are many, many options in collaboration with our pastors. And through Proclaim, disciples will have a lot of opportunities for community, both digitally and face-to-face. It may seem like there's a lot, and there is a lot of opportunity, but frankly, little obligation. Because I said before, we have to be compelled from within. This is not externally motivated. Proclaim members will be able to choose their own pace and frequency with how they get involved. No burden, no guilt, just opportunity and blessings to come. After a year of being equipped, engaged in evangelization, community building, we'll come back here again for another Upper Room Conference. But this time, each of us is going to bring 2 or 3 friends. And maybe those friends will be people that you led in a small group faith study, or people that you facilitated an alpha group for. And they're going to come to something like this and experience it for the first time. And then they're going to experience being commissioned and mandated to go out and spread the good news as well. So that's it. The 4 key principles of this movement: universal call to mission, proximate periphery, narrow the focus for greater impact, and annual cycles of momentum. A couple more minutes to land the plane. The ancient Greeks have 2 words for time: chronos and kairos. The former referring to chronological, sequential time, while the latter signifies a proper time or an opportune time. And the cadence of our lives is lived in time: morning, evening, routine. But every once in a while, we enter a kairos moment, an opportune moment, a moment that is filled with meaning and consequence, where danger lurks and opportunity abounds, where both heroism and its opposite is ours to choose. Kairos is a moment that will undoubtedly slip by if we don't rise to meet it with the necessary decisiveness and courage and generosity and altruism. Embracing Kairos moments is the definitive characteristic of the men and women who populate history books. The words of Winston Churchill come to mind. I'm not endorsing anything about Winston Churchill, but it's relevant. There comes a special moment, he said, in everyone's life, a moment for which that person was born. That special opportunity, when he seizes it, will fulfill his mission, a mission for which he is uniquely qualified. In that moment, he will find his greatness. Many saints had a knack of awareness for Kairos. I think of St. Thomas More and his powerful words, "I die the king's good servant, but God's first," and all that led to that. I think of the beloved St. John Paul II when he said, I see the dawning of a new missionary age, which will become a radiant day bearing an abundant harvest if all Christians and missionaries respond with generosity and holiness to the challenges of our time. There are lesser-known figures of history that would rank as some of the most demonstrative examples of embracing Kairos. For me, a newfound hero is a gentleman named Desmond Doss. Some of you might know that name, many, maybe not. But let me share a little bit of his story. Desmond Doss was a private with B Company, 1st Battalion of the 77th Infantry. He served in the U.S. military from 1941 until 1946. When Pearl Harbor was attacked, he was working for the naval shipyard and he could have requested a deferment, but he didn't. He wanted to do more for his country. He was willing to put his life on the line to preserve freedom. He entered the Army as a conscientious objector. He assumed this would have meant being placed in the medical field, but it wasn't. He was assigned to a rifle infantry. His refusal to carry a gun caused him a lot of problems. The men of his infantry looked down on him with disdain. They made fun of him. They persecuted him. They threatened him continuously and beat him several times. 2 or 3 times a week, they would wake in the middle of the night and slink over to his cot and literally pound on him and then kind of scurry back to their cots. And the very next morning, Desmond Doss got in trouble with his commanding officers because he had blood on his sheets. But Doss took it. He took all the abuse. One of his guys in his group said to him, Doss, when we go from training onto the real battleground, my primary goal will be to make sure you don't come home alive. But he persevered. He suffered physically, emotionally, and in every other way. There were 16 million soldiers in uniform during the war, but only 431 of them received the Congressional Medal of Honor, and Desmond Doss was one of them. What did he do to deserve this honor? Doss and his men were in the Battle of Hacksaw Ridge. They ascended the ridge in the middle of the night, thinking they would take their enemies by surprise. Instead, they were the ones taken by surprise. The enemy saw them coming and ambushed them. 3 minutes after they ascended the ridge and met overwhelming enemy fire, the commanding officers called everyone to retreat. Chaos ensued. The men panicked. They raced back towards the cliff. Some of them fell. Some of them descended safely. It was absolute pandemonium. And what did Desmond Doss do? At the top of the cliff, he stopped and he prayed. And he prayed because in that moment, he felt the presence of God was with him. But he couldn't understand what it meant. And first he prayed quietly, Lord, what do you want? What do you want me to do? And in that moment that was filled with meaning and consequence, he heard someone cry out in the battleground, Medic! Doss! And in that instant, he interpreted that as God's voice to stay. And he followed the voice, the name of the voice, the sound of the voice, and he rescued that man. And he brought him to the cliff, and he lowered him down with a rope that caused all kinds of bleeding on his hands. And then he heard another one, Doss! Medic! And he rescued that one. And then he got to a point where there was silence. Nobody else was crying out, but he continued his prayer. Lord, help me find one more. And he went and he found another one. And he spent the entire night rescuing men one by one. 75 men in total. The story is told when he received the Congressional Medal of Honor from President Truman. So this slide coming up. Oops, I missed a few slides. The president looked at him and said, Son, I am extremely proud of you. And I want you to know that I consider it a bigger honor to give you this medal than becoming the President of the United States. Desmond Doss met his Kairos moments with decisiveness, generosity, courage, and altruism. And so we have in front of us a Kairos moment, and perpetually it's always there. The invitation is always there because it's eternal. There's no obligation, there's no guilt, there's no burden. But should we accept this challenge, we too will be demanded to be decisive and courageous, to be bold and altruistic. I think we can all sense the Kairos moment is here, and I trust we'll respond accordingly. Thank you for your time and attention. God bless.